And this morning, I'm excited to be here again for another episode. We're starting all the great conversations that we're going to be having this October in Vegas and hacking one of the big questions on the agenda. Which competitive levers do you pull for success? So more specifically this morning, we're going to be digging into some of the opportunities for innovation in B2B payments. So I want to welcome our guest, Dion Lisle, Managing Director of FACERE25's. Welcome, Dion.
Thank you, Kisha. Happy to be here. I'm excited about our conversation today. I've recently been diving deeper and deeper into B2B payments. There's a lot going on. It's exciting.
I know we have a lot to talk about this morning. So, before we jump in, I, just want to, give it a little context. We talk a lot about innovation, right? And your role is really a really unique one, I think, in our industry. You play a huge role in, bridging the gap between incumbents and fintechs. And as a result, they're able to, put forth new innovative products in our industry. So I'd love your take before we kind of jump into innovating in B2B. What does real innovation look like, especially in a partnership?
Great question. I do bill myself as the Rosetta Stone between legacy banks and fintech startups, and I enjoy that. And I'm lucky enough to have been on both sides. Have been in a big bank, big payments, as well as fintech startups. As I thought about this question, Kisha, the number one thing that I think both sides need is empathy. And it's one thing I don't see enough of. I was working with a large bank where they said, hey, we'd like the fintech to send over their architect and a couple engineers for a half-day workshop to really lay things out. And I said, that's half their engineering team. That's going to ruin their push this month on their code. You can't ask that much of a fintech. Conversely, the fintechs that I've worked with say, I don't get it. Why do we have to meet with a CISO, a chief information security officer? Well, think of this. A bank holds your money. You'd like them to be safe and secure with it. So I think that kind of two-side empathy, again, as the Rosetta Stone between these, I try to help both sides see that. The other things I think about, one is really pragmatic. Banks have to budget for this. Banks don't have R&D budget, right? Like Amazon, 20 billion a year in R&D. Bank has zero, right? So they need to budget for innovation. They need to budget for working with fintechs. The other pieces I'd see, probably process. I have my own process and I won't go into that. But basically, I try to help them bridge that gap by doing a market scan, a proof of concept, a POC, a pilot, and then a go-to-market plan. And the final piece is, and I've seen this time and again, and this will spill into our B2B conversation, is procurement. Bank procurement is one of the most painful processes you could imagine. I mean, I'm talking root canal painful. It's just really bad. And I would like to see banks get a fast lane for working with fintechs in their procurement process. I think that would be a really big step forward.
Yeah, I mean, you used a really interesting word, painful. And I think we'll get into some of those pains in a bit. But in your response, you mentioned something that kind of, just strikes me as, banks not having a budget for R&D and not investing. Before we jump into it again, is that a trend you see changing in, given the year we've had and kind of the push for innovation and some of the things we're seeing?
Sadly, I have data points to support both. One, I've seen data points where people are pulling back, which is the worst thing you could do during these troubling, difficult, unprecedented, pick your word times. The fact is, right now is the time to invest, because banks are sitting, easy for me to say, I'm not a bank shareholder, but they're sitting on stockpiles of cash. So instead of doing a share buyback or some financial shenanigans, they should be investing in their future, and they need to have a vision of what that future is. And that future is digital. They need to go digital. I work with a company called Cloudbase, a really interesting company. But that aside, what they do is really interesting because they take all of your stuff and make it digital, quick and easy. People need to be looking at more like easy opportunities to digitize. And I honestly don't see enough of it. People talk about it, but I haven't seen the budgets free up.
Yeah, the key is that it's where the money is, right? That's when you're able to do all the stuff that we talk about. So hopefully that changes. But, before we dig into, our interview, I also want to encourage folks, remember, this is an interactive discussion. So if you have questions along the way, you're able to, submit them. So keep that in mind. So jumping right in, Dion, a few weeks ago, you posted a really interesting article. And I think that generated the conversation that we're having today. And it was on LinkedIn, of course, and it was around B2B payment issues. And in parentheses, you had disguised as opportunities. So I'm hoping today we can talk about the pain points, as mentioned, but also the opportunities there. I think to jumpstart that conversation, I'm curious, why are we having this conversation all these years later, right? Even the thought of it seems kind of counter productive to what fintech claims to be. So I'd love to jump into it, but kind of get your perspective on why are we still here? Why is it still so painful?
So something you'd never guess about me, and most people are still shocked. I started my career as a controller in a small company. I realized I was really bad at that job, so I changed career tracks pretty quick. And the difference between, and I won't say how many years ago, but it was a lot of years ago. And the difference between then and now is really minor. There's more software in a finance department. There are more tools to do the job, but it still boils down to this: send an invoice, take a PO, purchase order, match them up, put it together, literally staple it, and then process it with a lot of people touching that. And it's the number of touches in this system that really slows it down. So the issues that I listed in the paper you allude to, I did a Medium blog series, not real time. So when you do a payment, it's not real time. It's a manual process, as I just said. There's no analytics, sometimes no data. So how do you get better at finance if you can't analyze what you can't even see, right? Error prone, data entry, multiple points. There's also this what's called lack of remittance data, which is the data, or technologists would call it metadata, the information about the transaction. I was working with a client of mine, sent the invoice, they sent it back, they said it doesn't match the PO. I said, well, okay, how does it not match? They didn't send the PO, so I couldn't see it. We had a few emails back and forth, and literally, Dion F. Lisle, DBA, doing business as FACERE25. Well, their paperwork had it as Dion Lisle. That wasn't close enough. So we went back and forth, figured it out, and then processed it. That cost days of their time, days of my time. That's the type of thing that is still common. This is not a one-off. I see this all the time. Little minor errors or misconnects lead to delay in payment. And so these are the things that we just keep seeing time and again.
Yeah, you said PO, and that's one of the words I hate most in my job. So I know I can relate to some of those pain points on a very real level that
Yes,
you're kind of bringing up.
Fair enough.
For sure. So, I mean, I guess, the next thing that I wanted to, kind of segue into as we're talking is, as we're looking at the B2B landscape, what are some of the, I guess, opportunities that you see for disruption there? And before you answer that, I want to make this a bit interactive and get our audience to jump in and get their take on it. So you can log into Slido.com and use Money 2020 as our word, and you'll see our polling question. I'm curious. Dion's curious. We want to know which segment of B2B payments do you think has the most potential for disruption? So we have 5 choices up there: cross-border, domestic, procure to pay, treasury, and invoice to cash. So I'm going to let Dion give his answer, but we're really curious to kind of see where you think things will head.
And by the way, on those choices, there are different ways to segment this market, right? This is the way I segment it, and I have a framework that I work from. But the folks at Azul Partners Spend Matters, they segment it slightly different, right? But it is about ultimately a company procures goods, services, and then they pay for those goods, services. There's invoices, there's purchase orders, there's, as I mentioned earlier, remittance data, and all of the optimization around that. And it's really interesting because as you look at these opportunities for improvement, you could argue they all need improvement. It's just which one are you going to improve to have the highest impact, highest value add, let's say.
For sure. Yeah, I know it is hard to kind of, pick from one. And I guess curious to see what maybe some of our audience has to say on it. So I'll go to the results. And oh, wow. It's very rare that we have an even split. But as you said, everywhere on this list, regardless of how you're looking and segmenting it, we can all use for a bit of innovation. It's changed a bit. So we have 40% invoice to cash is kind of what our audience thinking. And then an even 20 split between cross-border, domestic, and treasury. And no love for procure to pay, unfortunately.
Now, that may just be a matter of people don't like that term because maybe they're thinking accounts payable optimization or, e-procurement. It's again,
it is a complex matrix.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes this market B2B payments so interesting is there's a lot of ways to slice it. And there's a lot of angles to it. Like I like this invoice to cash winning over. That's interesting because what that probably means, these are people who are more concerned about cash coming in than going out.
I know. That's totally telling, right? Cash kind of trumps all things when we're talking about invoices and the fun pain points, right, that we just experienced, especially with the example that you just shared. So, with that said, we got a little bit of a take from, the audience on, what their thoughts on. I kind of want to ask another question and, maybe dig in there. In your I guess as part of your kind of vantage point, are there players that you feel have the most potential to disrupt in this space? And, if so, why now?
Good question. Well, I think a couple things here. One, I think, and I wrote about this on my Medium blog, I think there's 3 companies right now really doing a great job, and they're new to the space. One is Visa, one is Mastercard. They're almost following each other's playbooks, as they often do. And then the other is Goldman Sachs. The folks who brought us the consumer bank, Marcus, is now using that same playbook to do B2B or commercial wholesale banking payments. What's interesting about that is they don't have a current business that they're disrupting, right? So this is net new for them. And they're taking a really interesting, very technical API-based approach to the market, which I think is really exciting. What I think is most interesting about Goldman Sachs, they have the base on which to do it, but they don't have the inherent legacy business on which they have to protect it or be careful about. Most innovation you see from a, quote, established or legacy player is when they don't have a base or legacy business on which they have to protect. And I saw this at other companies I've been with, where when you try to innovate, but also protect your legacy business, it never goes well.
Yeah, could be hard when you have those two trying to kind of almost compete against one another.
Exactly.
Sure.
And so, by the way, Visa, Mastercard both have huge consumer business, and they had some B2B business, but they never really focused on it. So watching them come into this market is really interesting. And I talk in my paper about an interesting juxtaposition between the 3. One chose a longtime employee, Mastercard, to head up the business. Visa chose a longtime B2B payments expert from outside. And then finally, Goldman Sachs chose a person who is very technical, former CTO. So they all took a fairly different track. Somebody internal knows our business well, somebody knows the payment space, B2B payment space well, and somebody who's very technical and going to talk to developers about how to do this. Very interesting juxtaposition in those 3 new players.
It is interesting to see when everyone embarks on a different, road, but the end goal is still the same. So it is interesting to highlight those 3 points. And, if you haven't read Dion's paper, I think he goes into it a bit more. So it's interesting to get just a perspective on how, folks in the industry are pursuing that. I wanted to ask a little bit about B2B and APIs. Because I know it's hard to have the conversation without bringing that part up. So, looking at the developments, I think around the world, of B2B and APIs, what are some of the opportunities with open banking and B2B payments that could be here in the US?
Well, I think as you look at APIs, the opportunity is to get the data, right? I mentioned earlier how there's this issue of data, right? But before I address that, let me say the biggest issue with an API or an open banking platform is security, right? And this is something people don't talk a lot about, but you really have to think about, and I used to speak at security events. I came from a crypto company many years ago. And what's interesting about it is I always tell people to picture a sliding lever. Here's ease of use, here's secure. It's like your house. You could leave your windows open and get a nice breeze, but it's less secure. You could leave your front door open. It's easier to get in and out, but it's less secure. It's the same type of thing. APIs are very easy, which means they're exposed, which means security is an issue. And as we look at these big banks with their data breaches and so on, those are very painful and very visible, right? So as people come up with an API strategy and as they open up the back office to APIs and inputs, they have to be very careful about having a good security process. There's a gal that I really like, Alison Knight, she's a security expert. I saw her speak at Money 2020, actually.
Yeah.
She did a fantastic job. I was really taken by how she went into the simple things that banks don't do. They had hard-coded passwords. They left administrator as the password in some cases, leaving defaults and on and on. I won't go too deep into it, but you should look up Alison Knight. She's a brilliant security analyst.
She is.
Yeah, isn't she great? But back to the positive side of the API. It's about doing digital. That's a Chris Skinner term. I just read his book, Doing Digital. Loved it. But I like the thought that you're not digitizing, you're doing digital. You think digital, all of your data is digital. And what that means to me, Kisha, is you enter data once and you use it many times. Think about how many times online you've entered your address. Too many to count. Why is that?
Too many.
Same in B2B. Why are we keying in information that exists somewhere? APIs can help bridge that a lot. My address exists somewhere. Just pull it in. Just use an API to pull it in if you know it's me, if you've authenticated me, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that's the power of API. Absolutely doing digital. Pull in data, use it multiple times.
Yeah, it definitely is going to be a shift in mindset, like you said, right? With some of the more risk-adverse players in our ecosystem. So I can totally see that. We talked, and I got so excited. APIs and all the opportunity there is always a great one to talk about. But as we were talking about opportunities for disrupting in B2B payments and which segments, might have the most opportunities and might be interesting. I know you mentioned Visa and Mastercard and Goldman, but I'm curious, are there any kind of, other fintech teeth out there that you see maybe having potential as ones for us to watch, or something really interesting that they're doing outside of some of the bigger players that we all know?
Yeah, good question. There's two that I like. One called Runway, just announced investment from Andreessen Horowitz, Angela Strange, and Rex and the team over there do a fantastic job in fintech. And what they're doing, they have this really interesting take where they say, I got to look at my notes to make sure I get this right. They say it's really important to understand how much runway you have, hence the name Runway, right? So if you're a business and you're managing your cash, there's nothing more important than Runway. And their website, by the way, it's runway.com. But if you look at it, it's one of the most creative websites I've ever seen. But at the end of it, they say, why are we still budgeting by emailing spreadsheets back and forth? They're right.
Yeah.
Conversely, a friend of mine is a treasurer at a mid to large size company here in Silicon Valley. He was working on a project with IT to modernize and build up their system and do it better. And at the end of all this work and all this evaluation, the feedback he got was, that's great. Can you make it look more like Excel? So he's like, oh my God, after all this, you want me to make it look like a spreadsheet? And this tells you why there's not as much progress in B2B payments as you'd like there to be. Because ultimately, finance people love them. They're not the most innovative crew in the world. They like things the way they like it. They like consistency. They like predictability, right? And so I think that's what you get down to is this, the Henry Ford, if I asked users what they wanted, they'd want faster horses, right? Excel is faster horses in finance, right? You want to be able to move beyond that. And there are some companies that do. Actually, we talked about APIs. I'd be remiss in not mentioning Modern Treasury. API company here in San Francisco, great group, doing some really neat stuff. And it's basically APIs to get the payment systems connected so you can just move faster. The other piece I'd say about this, Kisha, you got to think innovation in payments as standards. There's a new standard, newish, called ISO 20022. You can pronounce it 222, I guess. And it is about connecting data with more remittance data and moving data instead of moving paper that then becomes data. Because that's where all the mistakes happen. That's where all the delays happen. It's paper becomes data instead of data just moves, right? So
Yeah.
there are these standards like RTP, real-time payments is coming. That is being driven by a central organization. The UK has had what's called faster payments for, I think they just had a 10-year anniversary. We just launched our equivalent in the US this last year. The US payments landscape can be a little frustrating.
To say the least.
Yes. Well, as I often say, change is hard. Change in finance is very hard. It's difficult to get finance people to change.
Yeah. Yeah, it is totally a shift in mindset, right? As you said, and even the analogy, I think you summed it up really well of just faster horses, right? And trying to get them to make that transition to digital. I think more so than the technology, right, that enables us to do that, it's the mindset. So interesting take, kind of on what we have there in terms of opportunities. I wanted to, not pass up the opportunity to ask, if you had to kind of sum it up and if there was a call to action, something to help get us to, this place sooner where people are jumping on the opportunities and solving for the pain points, what would it be?
Good segue. Actually, faster. So B2B needs faster payments. We need faster insights. We need faster data. It's all about speed. So I think managing cash, which is ultimately treasury, about just optimizing your working capital, your cash flow, your payments in and out, all of that. It's all about speed. So hashtag B2B needs speed. That would be
I
my
love
summary.
it.
We need
I
speed in B2B.
I love it. I love it. And I think it's good parting words. It's just a taste of some of the deeper discussions we're going to be having in Vegas this year. And Dion's going to be there and be a part of that. So I want to thank you again, Dion, for joining us and helping us figure out which are some of the levers we can pull for success. As we go into a time frame where we're trying to rebuild and provide that blueprint for success for 2021. So thanks again, Dion.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Kisha. I look forward to seeing you in Vegas in October.
Sure. See you and all our other, attendees out there looking to kind of hack these issues with us. Take care and
Excellent.
have a happy long weekend.
You as well. Cheers.
Take